this week on the Backtable Podcast.
And the cool thing is when I speak with hospital executives and ask them, what do you have for like any AI platform? Because I always imagine it's somewhere out there, like, maybe not in the imaging, maybe they have something in the ICU or the ED or somewhere. I was astounded. The answer is, this is it. Imaging AI is by far the most mature clinical AI space, by far. And that gives, I think, all of us company in the space such a massive opportunity to become that enterprise AI platform. Kind of the message, I think, is that imaging AI is the beginning, but it's only the beginning. I think it's going to be part of a broader care transformation journey for AI.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Backtable Innovation Podcast. You can find all previous episodes of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and on backtable.com. This is our next installment in the Backtable Innovation Show, where you will hear stories from physician entrepreneurs who are helping to drive healthcare forward through medtech innovation. First, a brief message from our sponsor. All right, Backtable listeners, our next partner has a product that I use literally every day. I started using AG1 because my trainer uses it. And I asked him why. And he said, well, I feel like I get faster recovery and I sleep better at night. And so I learned more about it, and I actually got some free samples, and I started taking it. And then I told Mike and Sabine about it. What do you guys think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I started taking AG1 because my brother-in-law, he was actually taking it for the past year, and he kept on telling me how awesome it is. And then you asked me if I wanted to try it, Aaron, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to I don't
get some free samples, right?
Exactly, get some free samples. I don't have time in the morning to eat breakfast or anything, so I was like, this would be perfect. Let me give it a shot.
So I started taking it because I am susceptible to peer pressure, and you guys did it, and also because I got free samples. But the free samples was a big part of that for me.
Yeah. And so, you're taking a supplement, you kind of want to ask, okay, what's in this stuff? Well, with one scoop of AG1, you're actually absorbing 75 high quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens. What exactly are adaptogens, Michael Brazza? Do you know?
I think they come from space.
That sounds about right.
The ADAP technique, you suck the clot out.
That's right. They suck out the toxins.
Yeah.
Like you're doing a thrombectomy. It's it's a suck out thing. That's science.
It's green. It's literally green. I feel healthy drinking it because it's green. And anything I see when they say superfoods or the smoothies that's like super greens, I mean, this thing is green. And it actually, to me, I like the taste. So
it's green, but when you shake it up, it starts to turn kind of white a little bit. And I think that's the adaptogens that are alive in there and that are working. And look, man, if it's in my head, it's working.
That's right. And it does support mental clarity and alertness. And your subscription comes with a year's supply of vitamin D, which is very important for us radiologists. Since I know mine was like critically low, my vitamin D level when I checked it. So that helps. And it comes in this little dropper. I just drop, one little drop in my Topo Chico every day, and I know I get my vitamin D. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/backtable, as in innovation. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/backtable, to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Now, back to the episode. Today, we have a very special guest, Elad Walach from Aidoc. Welcome, Elad.
Hey, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Yeah, we've been, I think you and I have been messaging back and forth on LinkedIn for a few years now. At least I know I've been following you on LinkedIn and reading, the articles about Aidoc. I used to call it, actually, you'll catch it on some of our prior episodes. I called it AI Doc for the longest time. And then I started, we had Susie Bash on recently, and she was calling it Aidoc. We had Eric Eskioglu, and he corrected me as well on the show. And so, Aidoc has come up many times in prior conversations on the show, and I'm really fortunate that you've taken the time. Are you in Miami? Is that where you're at?
I am in Miami. And by the way, the Aidoc versus Aidoc is a funny story because, for the longest time, it was a big debate, like, what are we more? And we chose, it actually is a choice. Like we've said, we're more about aiding the doctor versus us being an AI company. So we chose that phrasing.
Yeah, I like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that makes sense. Doc, yeah, instead of AI doc, yeah, and so not so much emphasis on the AI, more on the doc.
exactly.
But so Elad is co-founder and CEO of Aidoc, a radiology artificial intelligence startup focused on using deep learning to relieve the bottleneck in medical image diagnosis. Elad is an expert in AI with visionary business insight in the healthcare space. Elad was listed in Forbes 30 under 30 Europe Science and Healthcare category. So very, very impressive resume. And I've followed you on LinkedIn for a few years now. Again, really excited to have you on. I want to start out with just, an introduction and kind of background about you, where you're from. Tell us a little bit about Aidoc. I know it's based out of Israel, but how that kind of works with you back and forth in the U.S. And then we'll talk a little bit about your time in the Israeli Air Force.
Yeah. So my background is actually, I've, never been an entrepreneur, didn't know anything about healthcare. And you're right. I was like everybody from Israel, served in the military. I was fortunate to be in this program. So a lot of times in Israel, you've kind of get screened to these programs. And I was this program where you serve for about 10 years in the military. And the benefit is that it catapults you to technology leadership positions. So at a fairly young age, 22, I think it was, I've headed AI for the Air Force, was honestly thoroughly enjoyed that. Finished the service. There I met my two co-founders, Michael and Guy. We knew each other forever. We've been together through boot camp, lived together throughout the service.
Cool.
So, and we knew we want to do healthcare. It was obvious for us that's where we want to go to. Yeah, you know what? Before I talk more about that, any more questions?
Yeah, so
into the origin story?
tell us about this elite Israeli Defense Force technology program. I'm going to mispronounce it, but Talpiot, is that?
Talpiot, yes.
Talpiot, yeah.
So the origin story of the program, it's actually interesting. In Israel, they had a big war called Yom Kippur War, where Israel's existence has been called into question. And one of the biggest elements there was that we were technologically surprised. And Israel government at the end of that war kind of said, look, we can't ever be technologically surprised again. And the thesis was, how are we going to bring in innovation, continuous innovation and leadership? And that was the origin of the Talpiot program, where the idea is to select about 40 people each year from all of Israel and train them across all facets of military work, and then catapult them to leadership positions with the perspective that if you bring people that are, high on, let's say, both intelligence and leadership skills, and give them a very broad perspective of the military, then they can be very influential in helping connect the dots, which honestly is a big theme we have across healthcare as well. It's not just about the tech, it's about having a deep understanding of the whole ecosystem and where you can play a role in bridging gaps.
Got it. And so, and you're not a physician, but you were interested in the healthcare space, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But tell me about where your interest in computer science. Were you like one of those kids building computers when you were like 10? Like, tell us a little bit about when that interest in computer science started and kind of how that evolved into getting into the military.
Well, I've never built computers, but I always loved the programming from a very young age. I don't remember when was my first computer program. I did go to university at a fairly young age. I think it was 15 or 16, kind of at least part-time. And, obviously did a computer science degree. I worked more on it in the Talpiot program. And what I really fell in love with is the concept of making computer do stuff. Like I always loved connecting programs with the real world. So one, I remember during my degree, there was this very cool article from the MIT Media Lab where they were able to just from, webcams, see your heart rate and Pulse. And I was so awestruck by the fact that you could just by looking at a webcam measure that I decided I have to implement something like that. So just just out of pure interest and curiosity, I've worked like months on implementing my own version of that. And I love when computers can actually do stuff that impact the real world. I think that's where for me, it's much more about that than, building the coolest algorithm or anything like that. It's much more about making stuff happen.
Yeah. Were you ever into robotics in that sense where you're programming like a robot? Like,
yeah, all the, it was, today they have FIRST. It was like a version of that robotics. This was in high school, actually. So we've had we've built this cool, we're building with robots, playing around with that. But I honestly just enjoying over time, the more like non-hardware and just pure software, I got more excited about that because like you can, without just using like very simple tools, the sensor you have on your mobile phone or a webcam, you could just do so much if you dig into that.
Gotcha. And so was there some part of your upbringing, you mentioned that when you got to the Israeli Air Force and you met your co-founders, you guys knew you wanted to do something in the healthcare space.
Yeah.
And we can kind of use that to transition to the genesis of Aidoc, but tell us about why healthcare in particular.
Well, probably I don't have to sell you on it, but we really, look, I really do believe that every business adds value and they're all amazing, but we really wanted to feel this direct impact on people's lives. It's a personal choice, but we've got a text message from a physician just last week where they told us about this patient that was an outpatient, so nobody's expected anything urgent, and that patient had a massive pulmonary embolism, which we flagged and prioritized. Yeah. And that patient would have waited for days before they're getting their diagnosis. So before talking too much about what we do, essentially hearing those patient stories about people whose lives we've impacted, I think it what makes all of us tick. And that's where we really wanted to go into healthcare.
Yeah. And did you guys, like growing up, were any of your family members physicians or anybody that in your immediate sort of circle that was in healthcare already that helped influence that?
Well, the closest one is my dad. So my dad is a big influence on my whole life. And he was actually an IBM Watson at the time, one of the originators actually of their health program. So I remember, look, my dad, you should imagine, he's Russian in background and like super nerdy guy. I can say that. And one time I came back home, I remember this vividly, and he's like, son, come look at images of breast. And I'm like, oh, wow, finally my dad is opening up, being cool. And then I'm like looking at the computer, I'm seeing like mammo exams, mammography exams with like AI markers on them. So that was his version.
Right.
And yes, so obviously that influenced me. I always say that I don't think he didn't push me or nudge me in any way, but I did end up in the same domain as he was really passionate about. So,
yeah, that's very cool. I remember reading that about you and your dad, that he had worked on the Watson early days, right, with IBM. Is he still working with them?
No, he retired. He's actually working with us now. So that's
amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
that's
we
very
keep
cool.
enjoying that.
Yeah. So let's transition into like the genesis of Aidoc. You and your co-founders, you're in the Israeli Air Force, you're working on AI projects. Tell us about like when the light bulb went off, and you guys were roommates, right? Or and you're just kind of hanging around shooting ideas with each other. How did that happen? How'd that unfold?
Yeah, so thinking back about this, like we knew nothing about healthcare, right? So like literally nothing. And then we also knew nothing about entrepreneurship, right? So that was let's call it the killer combo. And we knew we had to catch up very quickly. So on the medical side, first of all, we've had someone working with us from, very early days, Dr. Gal Yaniv, and who's now our chief medical officer. And he was a physician and he's a neurointerventionalist. And he was working with us from the early days as well. So helping think of ideas. And I think it's exactly as you mentioned. We're sitting, in the apartment and, starting to whiteboard ideas. We've had, I don't know, lists of 20, 30, something like that. But the one thing we really believed in is that there is a framework for startups called the lean startup methodology.
Yeah.
So those who don't know, I think it's honestly drives our thinking today, which essentially says the biggest factor in startup is the risk and uncertainty. So each of us, when we think about like a cool idea for a startup, it has sorts of assumptions. So you need to write down those assumptions, those hypotheses, and you need to start testing them out kind of in an experimental way. So that's what we did. We had the list of 20 ideas and we just started spending time in hospitals and asking people annoying questions until we started hitting on, some problems that people were like, look, I need this right away.
Yeah.
And radiology wasn't the first. It was like the fifth or sixth even, we wanted to do something for surgery and something for ED and something for oncology.
Yeah. What were some of those ideas, if you don't mind just sharing, if you can remember?
So one interesting idea, there's a funny story related to that. So one idea we wanted to do was to develop an app to kind of walk patients through the emergency department, because the thesis was that there is a lot of confusion and people are, want to know where, what to do. So I remember me and the physician, we started spending time in EDs and I started asking patients annoying questions. And the funny thing about it is that the one time, we've been at this ED department and we were asking patients, how was your experience in the ED? Like, what could have been better? And then like people from the ED came to us and, kind of kicked us out. I was like, you can't go asking my patients, what's wrong with the ED, right? That's not a good thing for us to do. So that happened. And so that was one of those ideas but one of the reasons why we disqualified that, we saw that there is, we felt that there is too much variability and that we can develop something that is like, let's call it a killer. Yeah. Streamlined and like a killer first. We really believe in like, you want to start with like a first, amazing application if you want to get to there. So we didn't see that. And in radiology, it was fairly natural.
So once you discovered radiology, did stroke come out first, or was it something else and then it kind of led you to stroke?
I will
actually
say,
back that up. I don't even know if stroke was y'all's first algorithm. I might be mistaken.
Yeah, well, you could. It's a brain bleeds, right? So
yeah, right, brain bleed. Yeah.
It is applied to stroke as well. But so our thesis was okay. So this is the idea, and the more we progress, the more I'm a believer in that. So the problem is not for a certain disease necessarily. The problem is we thought much broader than that. And that the fact that today in radiology departments, you just have such a massive overload of data and not enough radiologists. This is a worldwide problem. But I'll share with you one thing. I recently spoke with the head of the Imaging Council for Israel, and he shared with me, and obviously most of our market is in the US, but I think it applies. He told me he started practicing about 30 years ago in like 1990s. And at the time, there were about 500 radiologists in Israel. Oh. And he said, since then, we had new modalities, new resolutions, more and more imaging, aging population, you name it. How many radiologists do we have today in Israel? Maybe you could hazard a guess.
500.
500.
Yeah,
right?
It's crazy.
When you think about that, it's like, oh my God. So the thesis is that you cannot solve a single disease. That's not the way hospitals work. Yeah. A radiology department is much more comprehensive than that. And if you will do like 1 point solution at a time, what you're gonna get is a hospital that needs to work with like 1,000 different vendors. One doing a stub toe, one doing whatever.
Yeah.
Cancer, one doing stroke. So what's different about Aidoc in the ecosystem today is that we're just that much more comprehensive. And that was the thesis, is that AI is not a point solution. AI is a platform. It must be in order to be well adopted. So yes, Brainly was our first use case, but like from day one, when we interacted with the market, they knew the vision. Aidoc story is not about a single disease. It's about a platform that can detect dozens of diseases over time, granted over time, but be that transformation partner in order to have an AI-driven workflow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And so what led you to brain bleed being the first case use, like the first MVP sort of? Yeah,
it's just very common, right? There's a lot of these patients. The pain point is fairly clear. So that
was there a doc? Was there a radiologist who said, it would be great if you detected all these things, but top of my list is brain bleed. Like, did you come to that with questionnaires?
We did, but I just want to clarify that point. Like, even from day one, it was never about a single disease. It was, we have 7 things we need to do in the early days. Let's pick one of them, right? So brain bleed was definitely one of the most mature ones because it's so common. It's probably one of the most common diseases out there that is also critical, mainly diagnosed with CT. So we did have these questionnaires and talking with docs, but even from the early days, we knew that it's like, okay, we're going to do one, but like immediately after spine fractures and immediately after that pulmonary embolism, it wasn't one thing for sure.
Okay, so you created a list and kind of prioritized how you were going to implement it. I see. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. And so was your initial role, like you had 2 other co-founders. How did you guys say, okay, I'm going to be this guy, you're going to be this guy, you're going to be this guy? How did you guys parse out, delegate the work?
Oh, I love that question because, look, we've all came from the same background, right? So one could argue different personalities, right? For sure. But like, you just look at our CVs, it was fairly similar. I will say 2 things. There was some personal affinity, right? And we took our jobs in the early days very, very seriously, right? So me as a CEO, I knew I have to learn, learn finance, learn legal, be able to be from a tech founder to really a business leader and get mentors, business mentors and all of that. So I did have more affinity to that in terms of what I wanted to do as well. And what I think where my skills lie is much more in bridging the gap. And my co-founders were incredible and very supportive from the early days. They were like, look, let's let you have a run at it. And the one thing I will share that we've been, since we decided on the roles, and it was like in the very early days, we took our jobs very seriously, a lot of it for investors. So my CTO is the master in that. He's always thinking like how to, like team storytelling, let's call it this way. So whenever we came into investor meetings, he was always like asking me how I'm going to dress and like dressing like one level just a bit below me. And he always, when we came into meetings, obviously I'm a tech founder, right? So I know how to handle myself in a computer, but he was like, no, let me hook you up with the presentation. I did like, I can't even, play around with the PowerPoint. And he always set me up. And it was funny, those are the small funny stories of the early days, but it was important that we all played our part because it's important for customers, for investors, to understand, at the end of the day, a team is part of the story. You want to create a construct and framework of how it is to work with you. Obviously, since then, we really each evolved, professionalizing their own roles. But in the early days, it was more just taking a choice and then professionalizing.
Yeah. And it's super important to complement one another in your skill sets too, right? And you said you guys had a lot of overlap and, you probably, it sounds like you had interest in the business side of it and really grow, developing that out and learning more about it. Did you ever did you get an MBA or how did you train yourself on that?
Well, I've just read a million books. Well, I'm obviously exaggerating, but I've been reading, I was listening to a lot of audiobooks and I was listening to like 3 at a time, like 2.5x speed.
Yeah.
Just catching up on dozens of literature. So that was one big aspect. I do think that reading is really essential to catch up. The other thing is that I've had a lot of business mentors. To date, by the way, I have mentors that I meet on almost a weekly basis because I understand that almost doesn't matter how long have I been a CEO, and now it's coming up at 5.5 years. I still have so much to learn for the next phase. So I always make sure I have mentors for that next phase of growth. And I think that's essential for any entrepreneur, by the way, no matter how experienced, but definitely for a first timer like myself.
For sure, because it's a emotional roller coaster, right? And so there's going to be great days and there's going to be really low bad days. And you got to have somebody you can trust. And it's almost not just the business mentorship, but some emotional mentorship of like how to get through that, right? How to experience that and harness it and not let it defeat you. That's where I've really, some of my mentors have really helped, not just because they've been through it and they know that it's hard. And I think that's
absolutely.
really, So let's talk about building a team. So you guys had your idea, you had your, and then we'll talk about fundraising a little bit, but you had your prototype. Where did you start? You had the three of you. Where did you start from there in terms of building a team?
Yeah, so we also had a physician in the early days,
Yeah.
right? Still involved. So he was, let's call it the fourth. I will say that we were, it's funny, but in the early days, we're very, initially we had, by the way, to date, we really are big believers in hiring for potential,
Yeah.
not necessarily for experience, right? So whenever we had the opportunity to hire a superstar, even if it's not like super proficient in the, I would say in the role, we would take a bet on a person. And every time we took that bet, we've seen it, blossom. I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. Our first business hire, that was one of the most difficult ones. 10th hire, I think, in the company. And well, maybe he'll kill me for saying this publicly, but essentially when we started on, I was super impressed by him throughout like the interview process. He's in the company today, our VP of Business Development. So he's the first business hire. He was incredible in the interview process. But a lot of my mentors, by the way, told me that, I shouldn't bet on someone that hasn't, been there, done that. This was kind of his first healthcare role. And they told me, look, you shouldn't, you should take someone who's, especially as you're an inexperienced team of healthcare, you should, as first business hire, should probably take somebody that's been there, done that. And I honestly, I kind of told him initially, I kind of told him that I'm not going to take him for the role because of that. And he then called me up. He said, where are you right now? Let's go meet. Let's talk about it. And we spoke about this, during the evening, spent like 4 hours sketching out the role. And I was just, at the end of it, I was so convinced that even though all my mentors told me otherwise, I was like, let's make it happen. I have faith. And I can't imagine my life right now without him. He's my first go-to for every tough decision I have. So yes, so building a team is always difficult, and you have to balance a lot of experience hearing from people with a gut feeling on people and where you're taking these bets.
Yeah, but clearly from that story, he showed commitment right there, right? He sought you out and sat you down for 4 hours to convince you that he was right for the role. And I mean, that says a lot, right? That sounds like an A player right there.
It does.
For sure. Yeah.
He's an A++ player, yes.
Well, that's cool. And so how did you guys pay yourselves? I mean, you got this idea, you got this prototype, you got to hire a team and implement it. What did you do to fundraise? Where did you start? And just, we don't have to go into like, all the money, but like just at least those initial steps, because a lot of our audience is entrepreneurs and they kind of don't even know where to start.
Yeah, it has been, I would say, difficult in those early days. This was the early days of digital health, and we were fundraising in Israel at the time, and that was like very premature space. And the answer we got from a lot of investors was, you're great. Yeah, sounds interesting, but we really don't understand enough about the space to make a bet. So if you could get somebody else to lead, then we maybe will follow. Thank you a lot for that. So I think it was almost a year before we get our first fundraise. Obviously, the situation is very different now for us being kind of a very high growth company, but it was very difficult in those early days. So for the entrepreneurs, I will say the first thing, obviously, you need to start getting introductions, right? And that is just networking, meeting people that can send you warm introductions, always be thoughtful in every conversation, even if you meet a random person, summarize the call, have a great follow-up email and all of that. And then you build your network, and then your network connects to more network, which eventually gets you to investors. So that I think is key. And then when you raise money, I think the key is, the way I look at raising money is essentially it's your first sell, right? You're selling the product, which is the story of the company. So as you do with regular products, keep iterating. After every discussion, debrief, feedback, changes, meaningful changes. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of trial and error, but at the end of it, you're going to have a killer story that is going to be hopefully very compelling to investors.
Yeah. So it sounds like you had like a whole year of rejection. How did you guys handle that? That's got to be hard. Were there there dark days where you're like, I don't know, guys, are we in the right space? Should we pivot? Like, did you guys have any kind of those oh shit moments?
Absolutely. The good thing, however, is that we're three co-founders, right? So
Yeah. You could
the
support each other.
hardest, exactly. Like every time one of us falls, right, and then the other two pick him up. The hardest was when we had two fall, and then the third had to kind of be strong. It was incredibly difficult at sometimes. You know, you're getting a ton. I think we counted at some point. It was definitely the dozens. I don't know if we reached 100, but that's the order
Wow.
of magnitude. Like it's
Yeah.
a lot of no's. But I think that we felt that when we speak with users, the pain point is so very real that we had conviction,
Yeah.
and combined with the fact that we were improving and we were feeling the improvement in the reactions of investors, I think that what kind of kept us going throughout that period.
Yeah. So were you guys just self-funding yourselves with this conviction? Like just, okay, we'll get to the next step. We'll get to the next step. Did you have to take debt? Like how did you guys get through that year without any money in the bank to do what you really want to do?
Yeah. So we did, by the way, we did decide that we were going to take at least a year to prove this out. So we just had enough, I would say, cash reserves personally, right?
Yeah.
So we took, that's a good thing, after being a decade in the army, like we've saved money. So,
Yeah.
we weren't in a, that tough of a spot, but obviously we knew that if after a year this doesn't pan out, we will have to do something, even if it's raised like a small note. But for a year we did it, without anything.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, so I'm gonna switch gears and kind of fast forward a little bit. And you've raised money, you've got your team built out. Let's talk about how you implement it. How you got this MVP, this product, this algorithm. Well, tell us first. How did you get all your data to train your algorithm?
Yeah, the data is really important. In the early days was early partners, right? So that were willing to create an agreement with us, for data sharing. So that was the early days. Obviously, since then we grew and now we have a lot of data sources, but in the early days were just a few, even a couple of partnerships to get started.
Yeah. And so were there any challenges with trying to partner with people? Like, for example, Rad Partners, I know is a big partner, or any hospital systems. Did you get rejections in that sense as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Look, with all due respect to us, three guys from Israel coming into a U.S. health system saying, hey, love for some data, is not is a hard story. I think that what we've learned is that it's all about trust and how do you carry yourself professionally. And I think you're just building that trust because, look, health systems data, yes, they want to monetize it, right? So that's one thing one hoop you need to jump through. But more importantly is that it's a very, they take liability. So they have to really trust you in this. So it's about being professional, showing them that you know what you're talking about, that you care about privacy, that you're willing to take the extra step in order to understand them and how to work with them. So I think a lot of it is about educating ourselves on how to talk with health systems and how to alleviate their concerns in terms of their data. And I think that was really key. That's one of the things we really learned. The other thing that I will say is probably, I don't know if an obvious tip, but you definitely don't want to rely on just a single source. You want to make sure you're working with multiple at the same time. It builds, more brand, right? That more hospitals are chiming in. But you just have to, I think you can't rely on a single source of data, even in the early days. So I sometimes hear entrepreneurs are like, oh, I have agreement with health system A or B, which is fine. But I think that's just the beginning. You need at least a few to get started.
Gotcha. Was the focus always on the U.S. healthcare system, or did you guys have, were you thinking about UK or, somewhere in Europe or, the Middle East? Tell us about how you made the decision to just kind of focus on US or if it just kind of happened that way.
Yeah, it was a very conscious decision to focus on the US. It is the biggest health system in the world.
Yeah.
And where a lot of money and decisions are being made. So I will say two things made us, choose it. First of all, we realized that you cannot work in too many different markets, right? The chain of value and money, you just have to deeply, deeply understand it in order to make a difference. So we've had to focus somewhere, and obviously what better market to focus than the biggest one there is. The second thing, AI is just such a new category that we wanted to build the brand, to build the category. And if you want to do a proper category design, you probably want it in the market where a lot of eyes are looking up to. So this is why we chose the US, because we thought AI could be very big, and we wanted to do this right from the beginning.
Yeah. And at that time, when you guys were first starting out in the US healthcare system, what other AI companies doing with a similar product were out there at that time? And we'll get into, I want to, a little bit later, I want to get into competition versus collaboration. But I'm just curious, like at that point in time, was there anybody where you're like, oh gosh, these guys are, they might beat us to it? Or was there anything like that?
There were a lot of companies. So the problem of AI, especially in the early days, that there were like hundreds of companies, right? At least dozens, I would say. Yeah. But if you look at, there is this big radiology conference called RSNA, and you're probably very well aware. But there was an AI section there with over 100 companies, which is just crazy, right?
Yeah.
So the problem wasn't even a single company; it was just a noise. People were just bombarded with like this AI and that AI, and what does that mean? So that was definitely there when we started. There were amazing pioneers in those early days. I can name a few: Zebra. I don't know if you remember them. Analytic, Arteris. MaxQ. So a lot of great companies that are doing kind of things in that vicinity. I do think we've had a different story even from the early days in terms of the platform and how broad we can be and want to be. So I think we always had that playing for us, but we definitely were aware that there were so many companies, and even if it's not a single one you need to compete against, it's much more about being able to be the signal above the noise somehow.
Yeah.
That I think was a big focus point.
Yeah, that signal to noise ratio is huge with startups. I mean, we don't realize it, but I mean, you were probably well aware of it at that time, but the rest of us just see like a few big players nowadays, right? That have come to the forefront. How many of those people that were at RSNA back then, just non-existent anymore, right? A lot of them probably just died out.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting how that happens. And you guys persevered and you made it out. And so now let's come up to present day. How many hospitals use it currently, or practice groups in hospitals?
Yeah, I will say sometimes it's hard to count even hospitals because, we have some very big teleradiology practices, right? So, one can read for 100 hospitals, but we estimate about over 1,000 hospitals at this point, which is worldwide, but I think that's in 3 years. That's pretty rapid
amazing.
growth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for our listeners, what all does Aidoc currently help detect? So we already mentioned hemorrhagic stroke, but tell us what the other, product lines are.
Yeah, absolutely. But I will say that I think that the thinking on the market should be different when thinking about AI. It's not just about a single disease. I think it's much more about a use case or a setting, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So for example, one of the biggest reasons to adopt AI is ED throughput, right? But it's not about a single disease. It's not that we detect PE and that improves your ED throughput alone. It's the fact that we can detect right now 9 different diseases, plus we have a platform that integrates, other companies, which reaches to 15 diseases. Now you're talking about how to move the needle on an ED throughput, right? Yeah. So you've spoken with Eric Eskiaglu from Novant.
Yeah.
One of the reasons they adopted AI was how do you make sure that your ED is moving faster? And with AI, you can improve you can prioritize patients for radiology, which in turn impacts downstream. So ED throughput is a big one. And there we have a lot of different diseases we can detect. It's pulmonary embolism and stroke and brain bleeds and rib fractures and pneumothorax and brain aneurysm and probably forget a free area in the abdomen and spine fracture. So there's a bunch, but I think that's the value of AI. It's not about one thing. It's about the package.
Well, I'm glad that you clarified that for me, because I'm a radiologist. So I'm just thinking of one, disease process at a time. But you're right. In Eric Eskioglu's perspective and a lot of these, CMOs and probably just to get buy-in from these hospital systems is like they want to know, how does it improve our throughput in the
Exactly.
hospital? Yeah.
What's the ROI?
That's the bigger picture, right?
Exactly. And, people think about imaging AI as something that is for so yes, obviously radiologists are the leaders of this and the bearers of change and the champions of AI, but a part of the value is not in the radiology department. It's actually downstream. It's about how radiology impacts. And by the way, you're an IR, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And for you as an interventionalist, there is even bigger value because AI can be the trigger of whole workflows. One of our biggest products right now is a PE care activation product where, you can detect and triage, PE patients and then alert both the radiologists with the IR, with the care teams, making sure the teams can collaborate and communicate on those patients and making sure you can treat patients more appropriately. So it's not just about, so there's a different settings, right? We have the interventionalist focus AI, we have the neurointerventionalist focus AI, you have the ED AI, you have the outpatient AI. And I think it all under a unified enterprise platform. And I think that's the way AI should be handled and thought about.
Yeah. And, we just had Karen Gonzalez from Jefferson on the show. She talked about how they use it with their PERT team, right? And how important it is.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's great. It's really great. And so, I saw in the news recently on a LinkedIn post that you guys just got FDA approval for pneumothorax detection.
Correct.
Right. And that's great. I do a lot of lung biopsies. So, if it can pick that up before the radiologist gets to it, or I get to it, because, we're busy doing case after case. And it's like, oh my gosh, I got to check that x-ray on my patient from 9 o'clock. Here it is. I got to get him out of the hospital. And it would be amazing to just get a notification as soon as it's done. Hey, they got a moderate pneumo, bring him down for a chest tube,
Yeah. And I will add one more thought about it, because AI, I think there are kind of two futures with AI. One of the futures is where AI is gonna, so we all talk about healthcare data is very siloed. Mm-hmm. And AI can be actually things that makes us even more siloed because it increases efficiency, help you do your work better. That's one version of AI. And you see that with a lot of solutions these days they're really triggered to one specialist to help them. But I think there is another possibility, which is what we're trying to do, where AI is there to help break the silos and facilitate cross-team collaboration. So for example, one of the best use cases for the PERT and the PE example, I think is really great there, because one of the problems there is that it's not a decision you make yourself. It's a team decision oftentimes, right? You need to have a cross-team collaboration. But the question is, which is a key question, when do you activate the team? When is that workflow of, hey, let's huddle everybody and think about the patient? When does this happen? Yeah. And today it's very manually triggered. And because of that, a lot of patients fall between the cracks because you're not activating the team when you should. University hospitals, for example, unrelated to Aidoc, they did a research. They found out that about 75% of intermediate to high-risk PE patients, they don't get a PERT consultation. Which means for the audience member, that means that the specialist, the PE specialist, isn't being alerted on about 75% of relevant patients. How crazy is that?
Yeah.
And now with AI, you can then close the loop on that, right? Now AI can be a tool that it really fosters that cross-team collaboration. And that's what gets us really excited.
Yeah. So you're cutting out the middleman, the radiologist who has to then look at it and then call up the referring doc who ordered the study, right? Because it's activating a team to let them know.
Well, okay, I think that's a really good question. It's definitely not cutting out the middleman or moving in parallel. The radiologist still needs to approve, but the problem is actually not for the radiologist, it's after the radiologist. That's where oftentimes it's, ED physicians, which are doing an amazing job, oftentimes don't have, haven't been necessarily trained on the relevant processes. So at that point in time, after the radiologist, actually, that's where the cross-team collaboration needs to happen and oftentimes doesn't happen. So it's not about missing or anything like that. It's about patients that are missed, but then they don't do something in the system makes it that the broader team isn't activated. So that's what we want to do. It's not replacing anybody, not cutting the middleman. It's
just
really
streamlining.
augmenting.
Just streamlining.
Exactly.
Yeah, making
Exactly.
it happen faster, more efficient, better for the patient, clearly.
Yes.
Because, and speaking of that, cutting out the middleman is probably not the best phrase to use, but a lot of radiologists are concerned about AI and replacing their jobs, right? We don't want to spend too much time on this because I know you've talked about it on other podcasts and blog articles and whatnot. But can you just help? Susie Bash was talking about this recently, but just help our audience understand, for those who are radiologists or even other physicians who are worried about AI replacing their jobs, how it's meant to supplement, not replace.
I will start by sharing some news for those that don't know. About a week ago, the first fully autonomous AI product got CE clearance, CE marking in Europe.
Oh, wow.
Replacing radiologists for X-ray reads.
Wow.
For certain X-ray reads. So let's call it the threat is there, unfortunately. I do not think that this is how the market would evolve, but there are, I would say, there are areas where it's going, in a certain direction.
Yeah.
The way I'm thinking about this, and I think the market is as well, AI is going to come, right, in one shape or another. Where I get excited is where radiologists get involved and help lead to where it's becoming adopted in a way that is more safe, effective, and meaningful to patient care. Because I think radiologists have this unique understanding of informatics or of the flow of data. So I think the more they get involved, the more they become the champions of AI, the better it will be for the industry, because I think they will promote the best and most effective use for it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's where I want to kind of jump into the next question is, for those who are interested, especially guys just getting out of training, because they're like, okay, this is going to be part of my practice for sure.
Yeah.
The people later generation, they might be like, I'm going to get out before AI takes over. They're not worried about it, whether there's a takeover or not. The young guys, I don't even know if it's part of diagnostic radiology residency curriculum. Like I would think that would be part of here's your deep medicine book on day one. Read this, and we have a whole curriculum on AI and how that's going to be part of your practice. I hope that's happening. I don't know, but do you have any insight on that, on how radiologists are being trained and if it's part of the training?
I think it's transitioning. It's on the way there. I know the ACR, the American College of Radiology, is really working on this type of curriculum. And I know there are a lot of people working on it. I don't know if it has been solved yet, for sure, as you've mentioned. Like, I don't think we have the curriculum set in place. But I think if you think about the growth of AI, probably in 3 years, we'll have majority of radiologists using AI already, right? So
yeah.
I agree with you. We have to be educated on it. For sure.
So any recommendations, for people who want to get involved in AI projects, are you guys looking for advisors or people to help test, beta test projects, stuff like that, or any companies or projects of out there who are looking for radiologists to be involved?
I think the answer is yes. I think the vendors, us specifically, right? And I know a lot of the vendors, they are looking for the clinical collaboration. And we have a specific program where with every site that wants to do it, we'll do research, customization, workflow innovation. So I think it's necessary because, we bring one side of the table with AI, but we need the clinical counterpart. We know very little of the clinical workflow, and AI is just, at the end of the day, it's just a technology, right? But for clinical transformation, you need to have the clinical partner. So absolutely. Honestly, it's not that complicated to get involved. If you have AI running in your facility, that's obviously very easy. And if not, I know many of the companies, including us, are interested in doing research and collaborating. We'll be very happy to discuss as an example.
Okay. And you've mentioned in prior interviews how the evolution of the space is going to rely heavily on collaboration, which you just kind of alluded to, with different players.
Yeah.
So that collaboration obviously is with your clinical partners, big radiology groups, hospital systems. What about within the other AI companies? Is there collaborations or sharing of data? Is, how do the AI companies out there collaborate, if at all? Or is it fierce competition?
Yeah, I think it's definitely not in the first competition end of the spectrum. There is obviously competitive situations, right? There always is. I think where a lot of the collaboration is happening is evolving AI beyond the provider alone. I think we're at the same. So, for example, there was a stroke AI company that got reimbursement for a program called NTAP.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a temporary reimbursement, but it applied to all stroke AI companies. So now I think collaborating on regulatory landscape, reimbursement landscape, AI for like pharma, med device companies, all of those things were very collaborative in developing the market. And I think it's very good that we are, I am very happy that other companies exist to kind of push the envelope, try new ideas, and build the ecosystem.
Otherwise, it just falls on you, and that's a lot of work.
It's both a lot of work, and I won't think of everything, right? Like it's just as Zebra and Viz, I can name them. I've been, I think, instrumental in the reimbursement landscape, and we're very glad for that. Like we've learned, we've adapted. We are doing a lot of that ourselves, and I think we're very thankful that they've they did that. I think we revolutionized a lot of the other things in the regulatory landscape. I think we've been the first, definitely with so many clearances.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? And probably the forefathers of that triage space. So, and I think it's good for everybody that there is this kind of collaboration on those aspects.
Great. I was going to ask you a few more personal questions as we wrap up. We're on the hour here, Elad. But anything else you want our audience to know about Aidoc before I ask you a little bit more kind of personal stuff about running a company?
I think the biggest thing for us, the biggest strategic shift we've had is moving beyond imaging alone. And what we've realized is the end of the past year, I think we were speaking a lot with C-suite for hospitals and health systems. And like you've mentioned, Aaron, they care about the big picture, right? And when you speak with C-suite, they're telling us what chairs of radiology told us a few years ago. I can't be working with 1,000 companies.
Right.
I just can't.
Yeah.
So they're all looking for some sort of this holy grail AI, enterprise AI platform.
Yeah.
And this is the direction we're heading towards as a company. And the cool thing is when I speak with hospital executives and ask them what's out there, like what's the AI, what do you have, or like any AI platform? Because I always imagine it's somewhere out there, like, maybe not in the imaging, maybe they have something in the ICU or the ED or somewhere. I was astounded. The answer is, this is it. Imaging AI is by far the most mature clinical AI space, by far. And that gives, I think, all of us company in the space such a massive opportunity to become that enterprise AI platform. So kind of the message, I think, is that imaging AI is the beginning, but it's only the beginning. I think it's going to be part of a broader care transformation journey for AI.
Yeah, you have other companies like Theater.io. They're doing some very innovative things on the surgery space. To the audience, I highly recommend reading Deep Medicine. I just finished it, where every chapter is discussing a different, basically, implementation of AI in medicine. And, he covers nutrition, surgery, genetics, pharmaceuticals. And then I'm probably biased because I'm a radiologist, but the most impressive chapter is the imaging chapter, right? I mean, and I think he even mentions you guys by name in that chapter. Is like, you guys have definitely made the most progress, it seems, when it comes to it's the pattern recognition specialties, right? Pathology, radiology, and dermatology, right? And so I would agree with you. I mean, just from what I've seen out there, but you're the expert, and I appreciate you letting our audience know about that. So work-life balance, you must be very busy, traveling a lot. Can you just give us an idea of what you're, I mean, I know you give a lot of, you're out there speaking on behalf of the company. How do you achieve like a work-life balance, if possible, as a CEO of a AI company?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I don't know what to say if I achieve the true work-life balance, but what I will say is that for me, the most important thing is spend as much time with family as possible.
Yeah.
So for me, work-life balance means that, whenever I'm home, kind of 7 to 8, that's my time with my little one. I kind of I have 2 kids, 2.5 and 6 months. And I'm the official putting to bed, I don't know.
Bedtime, yes, bedtime dad,
Exactly.
Yeah,
so.
PJs, bath, and all that stuff, man.
Yes.
That's hard work. That's probably a lot of times harder than what you did all day, getting those guys down.
It is. It is. She's much more bossy, that's for sure. Yes.
But no, you're right.
That for me is most important.
That is the golden hour for sure. And my kids are older now, they're 8 and 10, but probably the favorite part of my day when they were little is doing that. You're right. And that's what they remember too, I read an article where I think it was from like 2019, pre-COVID. We were talking about speed listening to books on Audible at like 3 times the speed. I can barely do 1.5, 2 because the voice starts to bother me, the high-pitched voice.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, since I had you, did you gradually train yourself like to get there, or was it kind of big jumps?
No, it was very gradual. It was kind of this sense that, if I'm listening in like 1.9, then, why not 2? It's the same. And then if 2, why not 2.1? So it was very gradual. I will say that at some point of time, I just can't listen in normal speed. I'm just like, oh my God, they're so
Too
slow.
Yeah.
So yes. So now I've ruined normal speed for me, but I keep listening. I love it.
Yeah, it's great. It's really great. I love it. And I'm hopefully we can get more medical education stuff out there too, in Audible form.
Of course. Yeah.
That's kind of our goal here at Backtable, is trying to get more audio education out there. But all right, well, that's all I got for you. Any last word is what are you reading right now?
The one I'm reading right now is Play Bigger.
Okay.
Which is about, I love it. It's about category design. So really, they talk about the fact that all these, big companies, Uber, WeWork, all of them, they've created a new category, which they led. And I think it's so essential for AI. It is such a new category. No RFPs, like you're building something new, and we need to think about it in this light. How do we build a category that is going to be transformational enough for the healthcare industry?
Very cool. I'll have to pick that one up. Elad, thank you so much for spending this Sunday afternoon with us. Really appreciate your time, and hope I get to meet you in person, one of these RSNAs or some entrepreneurial meeting. I can buy a beer or a coffee, but thank you again for coming on the show.
I would love that. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, DM us at Backtable Innovation on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Backtable Innovation is produced and hosted by Brian Hartley,
Aaron Fritts,
and Eric Yamaker.
Our audio team lead is Kieran Gannon, with support from
Caleb Hodson
and Ness Smith-Savadoff.
Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz, with support from
Ann Dang. Social media and PR by Chi Ding.
And Dana Parker.
Thanks again for listening.
See you again next week.